The village president is not going to make it this evening, so I'm going to call the meeting to order. This is the committee of the whole on Thursday, June 18th. I'm going to do a quick roll call. Trustee Hallwax here, Trustee Mealopoulos here, Trustee Underdog here, Trustee Rosenblatt here, Trustee Rubin, yes, Trustee Scott,
yes.
President Rowan, as I said, is absent. In his absence, is there a motion to select temporary presiding officer for tonight's committee of the whole meeting?
Second.
You need to name the person that you're.
Is it
Gary?
you?
It is not me.
Gary.
Not me, yeah. Second.
There we go.
All in favor? Aye. Okay, that brings us then to presiding officer Rubin.
Thank you all. And thank you all. More serious note, thank you all for being here tonight. Present to us and help us out with these things. We're not live streaming this meeting tonight, but the video recording will be available on the village's YouTube channel. Pursuant to the village board's adopted public comment rules, because the village board's regular meeting is scheduled for the same evening as this committee as a whole, public comment on non-agenda items will occur only at the village board meeting, which begins later at 7 p.m. If anybody has a comment on an agenda item that is included on tonight's committee of the whole agenda, I'll request those comments be provided when we reach that item on the agenda. At the appropriate time, all comments related to agenda items are limited to 3 minutes, and I'll notify the speaker when the time is up. And with that, if I could please have Public Safety Director Sean Loughran and Human Resources Manager Katie Dar talk to us about our discussion of the 2025 staffing study for the public safety.
So thank you, Village Board, for allowing us to present to you today. As you may remember, the village engaged with Fitch and Associates to complete a staffing study of the Public Safety Department in April of 2025. And the village chose this vendor because of their client-centered approach and extensive experience, specifically with other combined public safety departments. Today we have Guillermo Fuentes, also known as G, and Melanie Bevan from Fitch and Associates here today to outline the results of the report and answer questions. The purpose of this discussion today is to provide an understanding of the study as well as its recommendations. There's no expectation for the board to make decisions at this meeting. However, rather it is an opportunity to ask questions, gain feedback, and understand the nature of the study. We expect to have continued discussions at future meetings. With that, I'll pass it over to G and Melanie.
Thank you. So everybody calls me G. I'm one of the partners in Fitch and Associates. Our firm has been around for over 40 years. We worked in every state in the United States, every province in Canada, and every continent in the world. So we've got a lot of experience, and we only specialize in emergency services. So our firm does not do anything but police, fire, ambulance, or 911 centers. That's our scope of practice. Everybody who works for the firm has at one point or still is an active practitioner. So they've either been a paramedic, police officer, or a firefighter. And these services, these combined services, are kind of unique. And we've done most of the ones in the United States have been reviewed by us because there's a very small group of consultants that actually specialize in public safety as a whole. And I'll go through this presentation kind of pointing out that difference because it's a very important mission to understand the differentiated factors that go into public safety versus having just a simple police department study or a fire study or an EMS study. So our methodology is very, it's separated in really two modes, very heavily qualitative. So we pull a lot of data from almost every aspect of your system. We want to try to define it three-dimensionally. So we want to understand not only call type, temporal distribution analysis, but we also want to understand the impact that it has against your resource. And then we couple that with a comparative analysis. how does that compare to the communities that surround you? And then what your utilization of other communities, what are you contributing to other communities? And how is that distinguished within your own community because you're a public safety department? The other part of this is very qualitative. Understanding how people see the system, want your system to perform, is a very important component of getting this to the other side. We interviewed extensively. And when we say extensively, the chief made sure, the director made sure, we met with everybody. There was literally, if you were walking down the street, we probably had an interview with you. So we really wanted to understand the impact of what this public safety system means to your community. And where those two intersect is really what's going to be the theme of what's going to carry this report forward. So just from a current state, and this is not unique, and you can just interrupt me because I do go very quickly through most slides, so don't hesitate to say, nope, stop, I need to clarify that. Not unique to this system. It had a couple of other particularities in the system, but post-COVID, almost everywhere in the United States had a loss of personnel. You're not exempt from that. It presents a significant challenge, more so, and you'll see in other slides later, because you're a public safety, to get back on track takes longer because you have more education involved in getting back on track. The workload in public safety is really divided into 4 buckets. It's really 4.5, but it's hard to put a half bucket up there. So the real distinctive value is you in the police environment, which is the largest category of interventions that you're going to do, is how much you do proactively and how much do you do reactively. Reactive community policing is generally centered around the fact that there's a call that comes in on 911 and we respond to it. That's a reactive patrol. The other 2 specialties, the police and the fire and EMS, very much reactive. That's really where they stand. They are going to go respond when 911 calls come in. The distinctive difference is your proactive patrol. Proactive patrol is when they engage with the community in the betterment of the community. So is that cross blocks? Is that going to homes and doing vacation checks? The advantage, and again, I'll keep pointing it out, the advantage when you have a public safety department is that you can look at it through a multitude of lenses. They're not only looking at it from the police perspective, but they'll look at it from a health check perspective, from a EMS world, or they'll look at it from a trip hazard perspective, from a fire world, because they live in all 3 environments. They have lenses they can look at a different piece. The downside to that is your administrative time. Administrative time traditionally in a police environment is very much centered around court. It's centered around finishing reports. It's centered around handoff to detective office. Because police departments tend to be self-contained, there's a lot of administrative interaction. In administrative time here, that's why I said it's really like 4.5. In the rest of your environments, so your fire and your EMS, training is really what's going to drive your cost strategy. Because to maintain proficiency when you're underexposed, it's all about training. So I already kind of talked about that. Reactive is really temporal. It means it's the length of call against the amount of activity that you do. And of course, the more that you do in proactive patrol, you're consuming time that you don't have. And so you've got to be very careful of balancing out what my availability of time is against what I can do as an activity. This department does a great deal of proactive patrol, and I'll show you the numbers in a little bit. So that's really what proactive is. Crosswalks, all that stuff you already know, so I'm not going to, I'll skip right over it. Patrol is when we put units where they're supposed to be to respond to calls. In the report, you'll see the comparative analysis when you look at the charts. It is really one of the safest communities in this area, is Glencoe, both from a public safety, so now we're talking fire EMS response model, and the police side. And that has a lot to do with your proactivity and how you interact with your population. So here, just to emphasize that for you, about 51% of the activity done by this department is self-initiated. It's them trying to help the community do things that the community wants from them. And that's very unique to this. And if you compare that across the United States, you'd probably be looking closer to 20% self-initiated, and the rest is reactive, so 911, which means that you don't have enough time to really be community involved. Your police officers, your public safety officers are very much engaged with your community. Community knows them. Everybody we talk to has had nothing but positive to say about your community, your public safety department. So, and it's demonstrating the numbers, supporting the numbers by 51% being proactive. This is just a staffing ratio or multiplier. This is where having public safety has a counter effect. So if you go across the country and just look at a police fire or EMS independently, because they're not doing multidisciplinary, you'll see about 1.22% staffing multiplier, so about 1.20%. So you need 20% more officers than you would to just staff the numbers that you want on the road. In your case, you need almost 1.5 officers to staff what you need on the road. And that's because the continuance of training is so heavy. Some of the numbers that aren't here, because I didn't want to overwhelm you with just numbers, but things that you can easily retain to understand why we have that exposure risk. In actual EMS interventions, you do about 1.1 call a day. So really about 400 calls a year. You divide that by 32 officers. The intervention component of that means that you are likely to only do one call of any kind of consequence every third or fifth day. You're probably going to get exposed somewhere in about 20 times a year. And of that, 5 or 6 of those interventions will be of a paramedic level critical intervention. So to try to maintain somebody's skill set to do an intubation, to start an IV, to give the right meds, the only way you can do that is by compensating with training. The exposure ratio is too low to maintain that. And if you were working in the city, if you were in Chicago, or you're running a call an hour, your exposure ratio is so high that your training requirement is much lower. It's just a matter of number. And the same thing with your fire department. Your fire department does about 2 calls a day on fire apparatus use. So trying to maintain a proficiency of apparatus use is very hard. On the police side, you really don't have that problem because they compensate. When we did the interviews, that was kind of the thing that came out very clearly. The public safety officers feel very comfortable doing the police activity because they are exposed appropriately. What they don't do on the reactive side, they can compensate on the proactive side. So they have a very good use value on the police side. And when you have the high ratio, you feel comfortable doing what you're going to have to act on. It's harder to do that when you just don't do it. It's a simple math number problem. So the baseline staffing for your officers, we consider it adequate if you're looking at just from a police perspective, your response. What your problem is at night, because you don't have enough lieutenants, and we'll talk a little bit more about the lieutenants, is you don't have oversight. And your highest risk liability is really on the police side. That's when the worst accidents, the worst things happen, and you need oversight. You don't really have it because they staff it in the fire side because you need that manpower to staff apparatus. Because your apparatus, you're only staffing 2 people, and any effective fire force has to have 4. You need to have a lieutenant on the fire side, just need to get 3 on there. So you're compensating by staffing on the fire side. You're giving up on your oversight on the police side. So that's really the interesting comparative that you have. It's not a staffing problem. They can actually do all the calls they need to do on the police side. They just don't have enough oversight on the police side. Contrary to the fire side, let's get right through that. The fire side, your problem is on any time you get the fire side, 3 is just not a good number. 3 leaves you in the no man's land. You're not 4, so you can't do 2 in, 2 out. And you can't, if you staff your ambulance, you can't use your fire truck because you don't have to be able to even drive the fire truck. So you're always robbing Peter to pay Paul. And the reason you can do that in your system is simply because you don't have business. But at any collision opportunity, you're going to have to rely on your neighboring communities to even respond to your calls because that area is under service during your MAC. So the increasing of training is really going to drive this to the right level of staffing. We talked to the medical director, and the medical director said, if you want to continue to be paramedics, you're going to have to train significantly more than you train today. He's like, I'm uncomfortable. I see some people only every 2nd or 3rd year doing intubations. That's just not a number that's normal. Like we wouldn't see that. I've been off the field 6 years and I've probably done more intubation from that time. It's just not a normal piece of how we treat patients. And when you're most critically injured, you want somebody feeling very comfortable when they're standing over you to do advanced care, right? They don't want somebody that's nervous because they haven't done this in years. And so the medical director felt exactly the same way about that. And that's where one of the strong recommendations of you need to staff to train. And so just the training by year, if you look at it, 2024 was a very high year of training. And that was more related to your hiring. You were trying to hire back to get to a full complement of 32. You're still too short, but that's really what's driving the police training. But even just looking at the chart, you could see as you intake new people, how much more training is involved in fire and EMS than in police. It's just the factoid is if I hire a new person in 2024, 25, all my training is going in that direction. And if you look at the years where it was in maintenance mode, they were under-trained, right? They were just not dedicating enough training hours to that because of key function, they do more policing to do fire and EMS. So
what's the sweet spot? Where should that, what should that training look like?
So the training should be pre-scheduled. It should be right in their whenever they go. So I don't know if you know how they schedule in this department. It's
A little bit.
roughly 6 and 6. They do 6 months on one side, 6 months on the other side. You should be treating the 6 months on the fire and EMS side as if it's a full-time department and get the full year of training within that 6 month complement. So the sweet spot, there's recommendations and they're in the report, about 240 hours is what is recommended to maintain that kind of training, both fire. Some of it's done on the job, so it's not all like I got to liberate them. You just have to recognize that a lot of the medical will have to be off the job training unless you're going to start investing in a simulator and a whole bunch of other very expensive pieces of equipment because they need hospital time, they need other exposure times, or they need to catch up to, I got to maintain that skill level. So it's a little bit mixed. There's we go pretty intensively in the report on the training requirement, but the most important part is having a dedication to that. The problem you have is because you staff almost entirely in overtime, there really isn't an opportunity, and I'll demonstrate that just the next couple of slides, right? You have a very high reliance on overtime. Well over $1 million of your budget is going directly to overtime, and it's not reactive. So we separate the two, and anytime we look at emergency services, and the shift runs, big calls, those are always going to be there. There's nothing you can do. About 12% of your time on task will always be dedicated because you got to call at 8. I can't leave. I got to go do the call. So it is what it is. That's not your problem. Your problem is just to maintain the minimum staffing levels. You're calling people in. You're mandatory them really to come back and do the work. So that because of that, that's not time that you can dedicate to training. Right? You're calling them in. They expect to be doing calls. They don't expect to be going to training on that. So it really does challenge your system. And it's the same way here. And you have an unfunded liability model that needs to probably be corrected, and that's on your vacation time. Because of this shortage, again, you've allowed them to accrue vacation and carry it forward. The problem is somebody earns it at $20 an hour, you're going to pay it out at 30, because if you just keep letting them accumulate vacation, eventually it becomes an unfunded liability, even if you fund the baseline of $20 or whatever it is that the baseline would be, right? You eventually have to pay at the rate they're going to exhume that benefit from. So the key finding really on the police side is that you have a significant supervision problem. And I would argue across all the lieutenants, you have a supervision problem because you don't have a layer that does real administrative work. You don't have that layer. You don't have captains. You have deputy chief and a bunch of lieutenants, and the lieutenants are included as part of the frontline deployment model. But I need my lieutenants to do administrative work. I'm also cutting them out of the field to do administrative work. So you have to normalize what is an operational requirement and what is an administrative requirement. And then in your system design, that should be inherent, but it isn't. And it's not unusual. It's always been a cost savings and trying to save on the administrative side, but the impact is you're removing operational time and energy. So other key finding, and this is a kudos to your department as a whole, is really your director, your deputy chief, and pretty much everybody in the organization really appreciates the mission they have. They like working here. And that's not easy. Public safety departments tend to be very difficult to get good satisfaction because it's a hard job compared to, I don't want to say just a cop because the chief will kick me. Mel will kick me. But if you're just a police officer, you know that one mission. Trying to absorb every year 3 different missions and try to work across that, understand the competencies, participate with your neighbors, that's very hard to do. And so it's a hard mission, but the people that we interviewed, and I think we interviewed everybody, I'm pretty sure we did. They were all, no, this is the model. We want our model. We like our model. It's been around since 1950s. It's 7 years old, and we think it's the right model for the village. So you have that going for you as you move forward. Our key benchmarks, we did evaluate you against the 10 neighboring communities. And this is the only number you really need to take away. Per capita, you're almost 900 interventions per 1,000 population. I mean, if you compare that to the rest, they're about half of you, about 420 interventions. And that's not that your guys couldn't do less. It's they're very dedicated to the population. So if you compare them here, that's the benchmark. It's not superiorly clear, fortunately. But you'll see that the average was about 420. You guys are about 890 plus, and the next closest to you is even at 600. And that's really just a factor of dedication. That's your guys going up and saying, you know what, we can do something for the community, we'll do that for you. Because that's all proactive control driven. That's really where it's driven from. Because remember, the beginning of the chart, 51% of your calls are self-initiated. If they were just waiting for reactive, they'd be right on the average, like 400. So our recommendation, I'll skip this one. I did this chart. I don't know. It kind of tends to be confusing. What we're suggesting in a nutshell is to try to increase your fire EMS side to 5 so that you do have an ability to respond to both a medical call and a fire call rather than just you're going to have to choose whether it's fire or EMS. And we were recommending you need to try to get to a number that allows you on every shift to say, no, I can handle those calls, which currently you cannot. And so, and I was joking with Melanie, if people knew that all they have to do is light a fire so they could get your police officers to go work the fire truck, they would have a pretty easy go of it. It's not ideal. If you're going to hold all of those positions, you have to staff those positions so they're able to do the job that they're there to do. And it's inherent. And don't be surprised, workload, you'll see them in the report, but nationwide workload on fires apparatus is only about 8 to 10%. So it's not a shock when you see they spend 2 hours on every 24 doing calls. That's really what the national average is. It's not unique to Glencoe. It's just readiness models consume a lot of resources to be ready. So our recommendation also is never be short-staffed on lieutenants. So go to a lieutenant model that works, plus negotiate with a collective agreement in which would allow you to have acting officers. In most big services, that's inherent in the service. It's also a developmental strategy. But an actor means that they are the officer in charge when the lieutenant's not in charge. So for whatever reason, the lieutenant can't be there, he's off sick or whatever, you never are lacking field supervision, because lacking field supervision where you take the heaviest level of risk. And so, and again, in your situation where if you went through a fire, you'd still need an acting or a lieutenant on the police side to deploy the police troops, right? They can't be the same person saying, well, I'm going to handle fireground activity and handle how I'm going to handle supervision of the road. 2 are distinct jobs. So we recommend going to that. I think we recommend very strongly to committing to a level of training. We like your partnership, so we'll talk about mutual aid for a second. I thought it was in here, but it didn't put it in. It never does. civilian personnel. Your mutual aid, let me talk a little bit about mutual aid. You're very heavily involved in mutual aid, but it's pretty fair. You give, I don't think it's an appropriate use of language. You support your neighbors, about 30% of your activity is actually in support of your neighbors, and you receive back about 25 to 27%. So it's a pretty balanced distribution of I'm going to go help you and you're going to come help me. So I wasn't overly concerned about it. I looked at that. I said, no, that's pretty good. And then about 40% you do on your own. You don't need mutual aid to actually have success. That's not uncommon in smaller services because the recommended amount of units that would be required on a fire ground is around 12. So in order to achieve that, unless you want to have a huge fire department, is really to do it through mutual aid. And I think it's pretty responsible the way you're handling it because again, you're taking and giving about the same amount of mutual aid. So that's, you shouldn't have any complaints from your neighbors that you're really abusing that service. One of the things that we recommend, and this is really not a huge recommendation, but it is a mistitling, if you want to call it that. The administrative coordinator does a lot more work than just an administrative coordinator, does much more like a manager's job. We're recommending you move it and add enshrine the position as a manager with the additional responsibilities that it's already taking on so that it just is commensurate to what they do. So here's the recommendations in a nutshell, right? So we say go from 3 to 5, that's inclusive of the lieutenant on the fire service side, so that you can respond to use the apparatuses that you have appropriately and respond to a medical call and a fire call. Increase the total complement from 26 to 32, reduce 1 lieutenant, go to 8, from 8 to 7 lieutenants, but increase your total frontline complement. We talk about having a level created in there. Well, I already just talked about the officer in charge, so I won't do that. We recommend a captain's level. We're not tied to a captain's level per se. We're tied to adding a level that allows more development of your police force, of your overall public safety department. I think it's important to have steps to get from one to another. It's a big jump to go from lieutenant to deputy chief. So the captain makes sense. Some of that you might have decided to civilianize. I tend to argue in smaller departments, you want more sworn than less for surge capacity. If something big ever happened, I could take 2 captains and put them on the field to work. If I'm using a lot of civilian, I can't use them for that. So you're not a big enough department really to separate that. In the police department I came from, we were 1,300 strong. We had a huge civilian complement, but that never came at the deficit of what you can respond to. In a department of your size, you want to have surge. So you want to keep it as often as you can sworn. And it also, like I said, adds a nice clean layer between a lieutenant and a deputy chief. Expanded coordinator's role, like I said, that's I already talked about that, so I'm not going to do that. Once you get fully staffed, we do recommend starting to think proactively. Most departments are doing that now. Yours in particular is more important than most because of the training component to hire more than less. So if you're planning on 2 retirements in the next 2 years, hire 1 and 1 above complement. And that way, when they come in, they're ready to replace them. If you wait till they leave, it takes you 6-8 months to get one ready to go on the road. So you're really actually at a deficit throughout the year trying to catch up even if you hired a person. So catch up, get to the right level and get the right training, and then start thinking about in future years about potential of pre-hiring your staff so that you can train them and then just have an easy ability to go. I've talked a lot about training, so I don't think I need to keep harping on it. And then I would keep building on the mutual aid relationships. And the reason we put it in as a recommendation is as complexities of both the NFPA and the paramedic services grow, you're going to want to develop more mutual aid training opportunities, more participation. It just is going to be impossible for a village of your size to actually continue to do that without more cooperation, more integration with your neighbors. So that's basically in a nutshell. Nobody interrupted me, which really is weird because I can ramble on forever. So you just interrupt. But I'm open to any questions. If you have any real questions on this, I'm happy to answer.
slides and then.
Yeah, I feel like we can jump through,
Yeah.
so. Thank you. Yeah, just want to make sure you get the right direction. So, so I prepared, a brief number of slides. I think very much sort of be covered, so many of the points I wanted to make sure we drove home. But before we begin, I did want to say first and foremost, thank you very much for this opportunity to the village administration first. It is very rare in an agency, you have an opportunity to have an external report like this conducted, analysis conducted, without the intention of a reduction of force. That's typically how these things work. And that's been my personal experience. And so I think it's pretty bold. I appreciate that a great deal. Thank you for that opportunity. Thank you also for spending so much time on this. Katie and Andy Curley, Deputy Curley, also put a tremendous amount of time. I appreciate that. It was a collective effort, but I really driving crazy on this. And also lastly, thank you very much to the staff for the entire department for their patience. When we first undertook this, we had a conversation with all staff to try to drive that point. So let's be patient with us. Most importantly, whatever the findings are, if they have recommendations, we must be patient going forward as well too, because it will take some significant time if with your authority to implement these things. So that will take time. So in advance, and thank them all for their continued patience. Let's go in the right direction. So, as highlighted, we on occasion do have concern, sometimes with the occasional overreliance of mutual aid. We definitely are over relying over time, but I want to drive home that the Glencoe Public Safety Department is accomplishing its mission. We are continuing to provide top tier excellent service at every opportunity. The thing that drives that is the dedication of the officers from the very start, even going back. And one of the first conversations was with all staff, and he's not kidding. We made sure that they talked to everybody. Everybody had an opportunity to talk individually as groups, but there was a great sense of pride and really understanding and embracing the mission, and that mission is providing that level of service that the residents not only expect, but they deserve. So I thank you very much for that. Also, I don't want you to miss that a very important point that you made when you look and compare the data. Looking at those 10 agencies or those 10 municipalities that surround us, we continuously enjoy that lowest level, or the lowest, if not the lowest, or very close to the lowest level of crime. But yet at the same time, we are answering over double the amount of calls for service, largely self-initiated. If you look at, say, one of our closest comparators to south of us, if you combine all of their personnel, all their sworn personnel on the fire department and police department, combine them, and the average, quite frankly, across the board, we are less than half of the average, but yet we need to hold and do double the work. So look at that, just as a thought process. What is important from that? Where do you get from that? Because we're so involved in talking with out of the car, we're getting involved with things that directly translates to a level of comfort that our residents, we can say anecdotally, they feel safer. But one of the things that was teased out in these interviews, I see the officers, I feel safer when they're visiting school. I see the officers at events. They get out, they talk to us, we know who they are, they come to block parties, they come to all sorts of things. And that's, we're not chasing, thankfully, we don't have to chase the radio, as they would say in the business. We can get out there and do stuff. And we can get out there and get involved. And I think that's incredibly important. And I want to make sure we understand that. We also have to see this is 72 years since there's been a substantial change or consideration for substantial change to the model. There have been changes, perhaps minor over the years, but to say a substantial analysis and change since 54, I think that's very, very important. But the world we live in now is drastically different. We have to acknowledge that. In going through that, things in regards to training is a lot more comprehensive, and the officers are accomplishing it every single day. Now, I can tell you from experience coming from other municipalities, talking to other chiefs in the region, they have an incredibly hard time maintaining their training time. these officers maintain our all three disciplines. Each and every one of them maintain healthy disciplines. And again, going back to, we manage that large through overtime. And that's from a management perspective, it's always cheaper to pay for overtime than as opposed to hiring additional staff. But we have to also recognize that it does have a long-term negative impact. And we want to make sure that as part of our strategic plan, we want to maintain this is a workplace of excellence and that we're looking out for our people in that regard. And that's what we talk about this. I can say, how does that directly impact you? What do you see? I'm sure you've seen a radical posture change at our pre-planned events. I'm sure you've seen a radical change at our festivals and even in our religious institutions at our schools. This is how we are reflective of, and we're playing, in some regard, playing catch up. You know, the world has changed and now we're getting into it. And again, it goes to everybody embraces the mission. And also, when we talk about the study here, this provides us with an excellent roadmap, not just for the next 12 months, not just for the next 2 to 3 years, but potentially for years to come. We have to make sure that we are always investing in our personnel. We're making sure that, and that has so many different positive aspects. If we can invest in and increase our staff, it can decrease that potential over time. It goes to, it bolsters, it provides further support. It can also allow us to guarantee for pre-planned training and make sure we bring it through, as opposed to, as mentioned, borrowing from Peter to pay Paul. We get the mission done, but we want to make sure there's always a better way of doing it. With any event, any large scale event, we always do a debrief. And we always say, hey, we got it done, but how can we have done it better? And that's what this 110-page report does provide us with that opportunity. Now, when we talk about in consideration for frontline staffing, the recommendation is to, if we were to allow to grow our ranks with they call it the blue shirts, the public safety officers, that frontline officers. The recommendation is to staff them on fire shift. And it's a reasonable expectation. What does the public get from that? And we're hoping, again, that once we get fully staffed, we're looking at and exploring staffing a second ambulance, a second ALS ambulance in the future. But that would also, again, we have our median age in our community is a lot older than a lot of others. So it's only to expect that we're going to see an increase in EMS calls. That's it for consideration. But I want to remind you, we are a public safety agency, and we have that capability of, hey, I need you guys to jump off the rig for an hour and give me some road time. You know, it gives us that interoperability, and we must not forget that. And I don't want to get caught up in the detail of, hey, we're just going to put people on fire shift and they're just going to be in the firehouse. We have that capability. And again, it goes back to the further, if we need it. And we do that often, but this gives us more room, again, to go back to do things in a better way. Another consideration also too on this is when we talk about both captains and officers. As you have noticed, or the way that Glencoe Public Safety has survived really is through hiring officers from other agencies. And we've been able to cherry pick quality employees and been able to make do with that and build our ranks. But we also have to consider there are other people that are looking to snatch our people up as well too. So I think we have to also make sure we have internal pathways for growth. We have to make sure we have internal pathways where individuals are enriched through learning, through different skills, whether it's, again, it's an opportunity to serve as an officer in charge, as a stepping stone on their way to being a lieutenant. Also the same thing for lieutenants into captains. As highlighted, that captain role, typically an organization coast to coast establishes a best practice. It's a triangular model. Our model is very, very steep. We go right from frontline supervisor right to policy decision maker. And that is an incredible leap. There should be something in between there for a myriad of reasons, right? It's an established best practice. But we are getting the job done, but there's a better way of doing it. And this puts it on paper and shows us exactly that. EMT paramedic certification for all staff is a bold move, and it's something I'd like to see, but we have to also recognize a number of these things that are made, these recommendations are going to depend upon collective bargaining, something as we start this conversation now. And we can continue as we'll have many more conversations. It's something that we have to look at. And it's in how to implement that. That again gives us a stronger interoperability. Everyone has a basic EMT training once to be a full off probation public safety officer, but I would love for everyone to bring it through the paramedic training, which also recognizing that is the most difficult out of all of our trainings that we go through. And then lastly, in the reclassification of administrative coordinator to a manager position, if you may or may not understand, it's that's a civilian position that within our ranks that largely oversees records, and it makes the most sense to then take our non-sworn CSOs, our non-sworn CSOs, and align them under her. There's a number of different things that make the most sense, and this tracks with elements that we've already sought to implement already. Minimal cost makes it goes to continuity of supervision, making sure again it's to one other level. It's an investment in our personnel as opposed to having the CSOs report to a different supervisor of the day. They might receive that we have presently have 8 supervisors, 8 lieutenants. They all might get information from those 8 lieutenants that might be correct, but it might be a different answer. And this is just makes the most sense in that regard. Moving in. Oh,
Sorry. Before we show numbers, let
oh,
me
sorry.
just
Yeah.
say a few things. Thank you. Okay, so I get the honor of being the cold bucket of water. So if you have questions before I start, go ahead.
Anybody else?
Well, Dan, let's get a little bucket of water.
Financials.
All right.
Okay.
Just to, is it safe to assume that so you're talking about creating these new supervisory positions, that in those cases, they would more often than not come from inside, and then the new folks that were new folks before Nikki tells us we can't hire them, that we hire are more likely to be, we're not going out looking for leadership elsewhere.
Correct. That is I would 100% agree, and I would not advise going outside for these captain's positions. It was one of the things I actually said in my own interview, in my hiring process. I think always hire from within. I think I think you want to always support that career development of individuals. And so yeah, short answer is yes.
And it's a good retention strategy.
100%. You need to do that. Our staff needs to see that we're investing in them, and there's a career path. That is, and a career path and opportunity for them. So we would seek to promote lieutenants.
And just from a very pragmatic perspective, you have a very young force. So it's a very good opportunity to create this stair step for them, because 36% of your workforce has 3 years or less on the job. So just so you get a sense of perspective, they're very young. So that's one of the reasons we push for more supervision. And B, it really does allow you to develop the people you want internally to grow through your organization, because you're getting them. And you have a large competition pool at a pretty young age in the world.
It's like if I went to another event, that we want a total of 32 officers, 7 of those will be lieutenants, 2 will be captains. Is that what you said? Is that right?
So no.
So that's just sworn officers, not inclusive of lieutenants, captains, deputy chief and chief.
So 32 is sworn, like a sworn.
Obviously,
Then top of that, it'd be 7 lieutenants supervising, it's 32, 2 captains supervising them, 7 lieutenants. So anybody supervises about 3 people, 3 or 4 officers. Can do the math.
Very good.
Yes, okay. That's what
And if I may, just one more point, again, just for the individuals that might be watching this at home. When I talk about officers, it is just using a jargon, if you will. These are victories that are not just their sworn officers. These are victories of our non-sworn CSOs. These are victories of our civilian staff as well too. It is a collective effort. And everyone works together and pulls in the same direction. That is bigger, bigger. So I didn't want to. Try to get it out. It,
Yeah, could you tell us more about the role of CSOs and how this?
sure, so
You know,
a CSO.
what they can and can't do and how that's working?
So, sure, the CSO so the officer is a non-sworn officer that is in uniform, not armed. But handles functions throughout, and it's not just unique to us, it's throughout the region. Handles a number of administrative tasks, has limited ability to issue citations, managing parking, managing traffic, that sort of thing. Our CSOs also conduct follow-ups in regards to animal rights, as well as in messenger runs, court runs, evidence destruction, that sort of thing. It's a lower cost alternative as opposed to tasking a higher paid sworn officer to perform functions that they're capable of doing.
How many CFOs do we have now?
3. 1 C.
Yeah.
We have 3 CSOs.
I'm in a colder bucket of water than Nikki. And since we're reviewing this, and G mentioned this is a fairly unique model we have, and we're still confident it's the right model, confident that I guess we're also confident about why isn't the rest of the world doing it, right? And should we be considering, is this still the right model just because we've done it for 70 years? Doesn't mean it's the right model for the next 70.
So maybe let me try to address the first part. Why does most people not do it? It's a very complex model to maintain. Is it a better model? Well, your neighbors have combined forces in about equivalent population that are double the size of yours. So they have 56 versus you're now wanting 36, right? So it is cost effective if you can maintain the level of training required. That's the balancing act. So it's just a matter of what you choose. There are lots of other models, and we were not tasked with saying, what would be a rock bottom model. If you wanted to really save all the dollars, then there are, you could rent services rather than own services. That's a cheaper model, but that's not the intent. The intent is what we recognized early in the project is the level of quality of service that you're getting, and you're getting it at a relatively cost-effective perspective. And you'll see in the report, it compares all the communities around you. When you take a service and say, I'm going to make one fire service, one police service, one EMS service, you're adding all the layers of administration over all of those. You end up with chiefs, you end up with more chiefs, you end up with more lieutenants, you end up with more everything. So it ends up costing more. So the model is cost effective. It's just, it takes a lot more training to get it done.
What do people rent? They probably rent the fire, they probably don't rent the police, right?
Yeah, no, not
That's
normally.
rents
We're
police.
doing that right now.
Yeah, some people do paramedics, there's private services that do paramedic services.
Not enough.
Yeah, that's what you do. But I would recommend strongly to avoid that if you don't have to change the model, because it would not, at the end, you'd be disappointed. It would not save you the money that you might anticipate.
Yeah, at the end of the day, when it's, somebody in a police vehicle that shows up first and saves somebody having a heart attack because they're trained for it and they have enough in the back of their squad to bring out to do it. You don't need many of those to make an enormous difference in the community as a whole.
And I would add, I think one of the reasons it isn't just that the public safety officers are good at community relations. It's the relationship to the broader Glencoe community is enhanced by the fact that the officers are cross-trained. There is a legitimate difference between a public safety officer in Glencoe versus a police officer or a firefighter in Winnetka. And it comes from the fact that there is this blend of support in the community, not to be, I don't think this will surprise people, but often in communities, police is less popular than fire. Because police enforces and fire supports. And we are benefited by the fact that our officers do both. And I think there is a relationship improvement We've seen that in our community surveys over the last several years. We've done 3 community surveys, and we are seeing consistent high performance among our residents from the standpoint of their perception of the department. And I think that's important these days, particularly. That has been something that we've maintained since we started doing those surveys back in 2017. So we'll be doing another one in 2027. My sense is that we will continue that trend, but I think that's an important just kind of qualifier also. And just one other reminder, this is just for the benefit of everybody who may be just kind of tuning in to be curious. The Glencoe Public Safety Department was created in 1954 as a means of engaging with the community, making sure that we could efficiently provide the services that both the police and fire departments that were in existence at the time were doing, but to do so in a way that was more sustainable in the long term. It is no longer a model that other communities in the state of Illinois can employ. There was state statute that changed in the latter part of the 2000s that we were grandfathered in. So another community doesn't have the ability in the state of Illinois to create a public safety department as we have. So we are an anomaly in Illinois. There is another public safety department in Rosemont. Rosemont could not be a more different community. You know, they have 7,000 hotel rooms, convention center, well, that's displays, but all of those functional areas are just very different. And so the Glencoe public safety model is incomparable across the state of Illinois. So one of the reasons that Fitch was brought in was to help us look at it not only from our own statewide lens, but also to take a look at what a public safety department in other states. It is more prevalent in other places. California, Michigan, Wisconsin are states that have more of this type of model of service. So when we compare and contrast, that's always been one of our challenges because our officers do things differently than their neighbors in the town one over. So I think it's just important, just kind of world reminders in terms of how this is structured, why it's structured this way. And when we went into this, and I'll be the first to admit, my perspective and perception of the community's care and satisfaction with the department is due in large part to its structure, due in large part to, of course, the people that are employed, but that sense that, as Trustee Rubin mentioned, you call 911 and the first individual, because someone's sick or not well, the first individual who shows up may not be in the ambulance or the engine, and maybe in a squad car, and that person can jump into action immediately. And so that is a peace of mind point that differentiates this department from all of its neighbors.
If I can just add to this, when I went through the police academy very, very long ago, almost 40 years ago, my academy training was maybe 450 hours. In many states now, we're up to almost 800 hours. And while there may be a little bit more driving, or maybe a little bit more shooting guns, what you're seeing is now almost 3 times in life safety, how to stop the bleed, more on CPR, more on cops dealing with saving lives, as opposed to all the other things that people imagine. They have tripled those efforts, even in the most basic police academy, to just what you're saying. And not only are you going to get that basic police academy training, you all are armed with folks that have 10 times that amount with this model that you have. It's just really very unique, and it saves lives.
One last question. I wanted to clarify or sort of emphasize what I thought I heard you say, which is that from the staff's perspective, the officer's perspective, they like this model. They it's sort of, I don't get a vote, but we care what they think. So,
Yeah, they're believers. They're believers that, I mean, they're here right now. And again, for information to people who might be watching this at home, even other officers that are here on their own time to learn this proceeding, with this presentation. They're incredibly interested in maintaining, and they want to maintain that level of service. That's dedication. And I can only point to something that happened prior to my appointment. Years ago, when we were particularly short, there was discussion if they would, what their thought was, if they had any input on subcontracting advanced life support services out. And to a man and woman, they all said absolutely not. That's our job. That's what we do. And so that's and it's hard to do. It's hard to do. So but that's what they want to do. So.
I
Thank
worked
you.
for a village manager that said you can build a bridge to the moon if you just have enough time and money. So anything's possible. I want to start out by saying that we have committed the February or the August finance committee to going into a deeper dive into the financials on this. So I will say before I flip the slide, there are a lot of unknowns in this. And a lot of the cost would be associated with the path forward that we take. There's a net addition of 7 full-time employees that are included in the proposal as is. In the staff report, I think we're loosely recommending a phase-in of 4 years. Understanding that phase-in, whether it's 4 years or wherever the board heads with it, it wouldn't happen on day one. There is no possible way, even if we started today, that we would be able to hire 7 folks and start them in action January 1, 2027. Our first blush at cost estimates of this, we were trying to do everything at once, and it's just not realistic. So what we've tried to do is break down the components for you. I have a big draft on there. These numbers are subject to change, and obviously the out years, I'm making a lot of assumptions on cost of living. So just walking you through the chart and the top area, the personnel costs we're relatively confident in, right? Our salary is set by the collective bargaining agreement. We are up for negotiation this year. The collective bargaining agreement just expires on December 31st. So even in year 2, 3, and 4, I've made an assumption that will be determined by the collective bargaining agreement. Moving down in year 1, we have a base salary, we have benefits that would include health insurance, dental vision, employment taxes, and any other benefits that employees get as of right now. The pension cost is an estimate. This is normal cost only. And as you all remember from our August Finance Committee meeting, the normal cost is just the cost that's incurred by the employee in the year that they are working. So that is current year only. That this does not include the unfunded liability. If you hired someone outright, the normal cost would be all that they incur. If you transfer in a lateral officer, they come with cost. There is a calculation that happens when we take in a lateral officer. It is designed not to harm our fund to take in lateral transfers. We've had that conversation before. However, I will caveat that by these are all calculations that are done by actuaries at a point in time, and it can change in a moment. So that unfunded liability is always going to be a number that we're chasing. As we get into a deeper dive in all of this, we will be doing a special actuarial study just to assess the cost of this, because the 26,000 is grossly underestimated. I can tell you that right now. Overtime is just a guess. This is a per person officer cost right now. Obviously that varies widely per officer. We also, as part of the study, one of the recommendations that's being made is to potentially increase the paramedic stipend. For a new officer coming in under this study, that would not take effect until year 4. And that's a best case scenario that assumes we can get them in the police academy right away, they get through the fire academy right away, they get through EMTB, and then they pass their paramedic test on a timely basis, and they go through the program in a perfect 4-year environment. So in reality, this would be stretched out over several years. Those are base costs. That's to get you in the door. So if I'm selling you a used car, this is just, or a new car, this is the base model. Our public safety officers, due to the nature of their work, come with a lot of accessories. They come with a lot of equipment. So if you can see in the next section, the pre-employment and training costs, there are some onboarding costs that we go through. They go through the academy. They go through typically police academy, then fire academy, EMTB, then paramedic. You can see paramedic is the highest of the 4 if they elect to go through that. One of the considerations that will be part of the study is whether or not we would require paramedic licensing going forward. That would need to be negotiated. So again, this is all theoretical draft numbers. The next line down is all of the testing equipment, uniforms, and gear. This is all of the employment testing, their turnout gear, their uniforms, their firearm, their SCBA apparatus, all of the equipment that they need to do their job phased in over those years as they are trained on each element of the job. That adds another, so if we're just looking at year 1, you have about 160 in base salary, another almost $30,000 in equipment and training in the first year. And then you can see that projected out. The out years would obviously depend on where the negotiation goes with the collective bargaining agreement, what those cost of living increases would look like. There are other costs to this, and that can depend on the pathway we choose forward. A lot of the training that our public safety officers get is free of charge, but it is not free to the village. Every time someone goes out, we have to backfill that position. If we were to hire on new officers, if we didn't add to strength immediately, you wouldn't be backfilling those shifts. So if you think about this, we're hiring on 6 new officers, 5 new into the ranks, because of the way that we're proposing this. You could funnel those through training without backfilling those shifts, but starting in year 2, year 3, as they start to add value in the department, they're out in the streets. Once they get through the police academy, they may be working police shifts. If we're backfilling, you could see a training overtime backfill cost from anywhere from $0 up to $135,000. If they're out, paramedic training is a long period of time, so that's a good amount of their salary that you would be backfilling that position. There's also ongoing training. So in a magical world, and we are fully staffed and we have no one out for any reason whatsoever, and you did 1 to 2 training days a month, you also have to backfill those shifts as well. So that would be an ongoing cost. Again, ballpark estimates between roughly $3,500 and $20,000 per officer per year. At some point, we may need additional vehicles if you add 6 new bodies. Our squad cars are running around $75,000 to $95,000, depending on when you look at this. If you're looking obviously next year will be cheaper than 5 years from now. If we are to up the fire service, if we were ever to run the second ambulance on a regular basis, if you recall, right now we have a full-time ambulance that runs. We also have a reserve ambulance. If we were to staff that ambulance on a regular basis, there's a cost for that, right? That reserve ambulance is not equipped for an everyday ambulance run right now. So we would need to invest in that ambulance. If we start running that every day, it may not last very long. So we could be looking at a second cost for an ambulance. And if you remember at the finance committee, we talked about that being about $450,000 that we are targeting to replace our existing ambulance a couple of years from now. So that cost will obviously go up the longer that we wait. Running the reserve ambulance, we have an estimate of it would take about $30,000 to get it up and running today to be, you know, a second reliable reserve ambulance. And then the last item on this slide is that long-term pension impact. So we would need to look at a specific actuarial study for this to understand what that added cost would be per officer. In terms of a normal cost, how our estimate compares to what the actuary says that he's guessing at it, and then what that would do to our unfunded liability in terms of funding on a yearly basis. When I switch to captain, understandably the cost goes up appreciably because we're looking at a supervisor rank. We also have to be mindful of compression issues, both from the officers and the lieutenants. We put that base salary at 191 and the benefits go along with that. It's usually percentage based in terms of personnel costs. And the normal cost is about $50,000. So that would be every year per officer that would be added to our operating costs. We put an estimate here in the paramedic bonus increase. I'm going to caveat this for the public, anyone watching at home or anyone that's here. There is no magic in this number. We're just estimating what that could potentially look like. And that's a subtotal of just shy of 300,000 per captain. When you add in additional training and equipment, ideally, Trustee Scott, to your point, ideally your captains would come within the department. They would already have all of the certifications, fire, police, EMT, paramedic, but they still need additional equipment. They need IT workstations. We don't have that. A mobile laptop in their vehicle, and then potentially vehicles for them as well. So their equipment will be another 48,000. If we look at vehicles, it would be a similar cost, 75 to 95,000 per vehicle. And that's fully outfitted with the equipment that needs to go in there. There's also needs to be an office space filled out for this. It could be a wide range depending on what that looks like, between $25,000 and $50,000. We have a space needs analysis going on right now that's already telling us what we know, that we are bursting at the seams a little bit. So that is a solution that we would need to cost out. This is, again, just an estimate. There's also cost to accreditation. So part of bringing the captains in, we talked a little bit about that being an administrative shift, that a lot of the administrative work will be completed to those captains with the goal of accreditation of the department. There are two separate accreditation programs that we've discussed. One is more expensive than the other, so you have a range there, and that's an annual, essentially a subscription fee for that accreditation between $35 and $75. And again, I have the same caveat on the unfunded liability for pensions, but that could vary widely. Some other items that I do want to notice, just note, this is the good news, right? So if we do end up reducing the lieutenant position, that could save us about 250 to 270 annually. So if the board moves forward with this restructure as it is, it would be an addition of 2 captains, but a reduction of the lieutenant. So that is offset. That is a negative reduction to the budget. And then the administrative manager promotion, we're estimating that would be between $15,000 and $17,000 annually, again, indexed with cost of living, and then additional training for that position to get them up to speed. And then an officer in charge stipend is just kind of a to be determined what that would look like, because that could take several forms, whether it's a flat dollar or a percentage or a bonus. What that would look like. So those are the additional cost implications that we would have to take into consideration as we move forward and decide which pathway to go. Any questions on this?
Initial question.
Initial. And again, we will be taking a much deeper dive next month.
And that's a lot, and some of it's lumped together such
And the
as.
finance.
Yeah. Such as
Overtime should go down.
eventually.
Well, eventually, there will be.
And right now, yeah, you're looking at $1 million a year, so. I think I go down, and hopefully it will be able to go down. As you pointed out, I think you wouldn't necessarily be backfilling. You wouldn't necessarily be backfilling the new hire,
Correct.
because by definition, they don't exist, right?
They don't
Well,
exist
they don't,
today.
Right, yeah.
Right. So at what point?
So,
would you-
right, yeah, would you start going forward to do that, but now you have more personnel and so you built into the shifts and presumably that your overtime. I think that's sort of a longer term offset. So
What we want to be able to try to do is to look at different scenarios of timelines, different scenarios of onboarding. What is that, what does that mean too, right? And from the standpoint of operations, if we add a person a year, we add 2 people a year. If we add the captains right away, if we add one at a time, those kinds of scenarios are what we want to be able to game out a bit and understand from an operations standpoint their impact, right? Because they're going to change depending upon how those scenarios work out. What we also know is we don't have a revenue stream to support a full-scale implementation. We don't have a revenue stream to support a portion of the implementation. So that's another big question for us all to grapple with as well when we think about timelines, when we think about a path forward and what that looks like. We, as the board is well aware, Glencoe is a community that is blessed with exceptionally high property values and an affluent community generally, but that doesn't always translate into how our budget is built, right? And so we also recognize that impacts like these may be significant to the individual property taxpayer, to the community. And what does that mean as well as we roll this out? What does it mean to the individual Glencoe homeowner as we move this forward from concept to reality? And so I think that's a piece of what we're hoping to do. I don't want to overpromise that August is going to suddenly be the time where all questions will be answered. I think we'll probably generate more questions as we do so, but I think that's going to be a really good opportunity for us to kind of pop the hood a bit and talk a bit about some of these specific components of each of these ranks.
We need to move on to the next topic.
Yeah, I think we're done with the presentation for the most part. Obviously, if there are further questions that you may have either tonight or as you absorb this, it's a lot, right? I think it's a lot to think about in all the best ways. What I'm gratified by as I see this is that we have a department that we can be proud of. We have a department that is doing exceptionally good work for the community. And we have plans for stormwater management, like we have plans for our water distribution system. We have a plan on how to supplement that very effectively operating department on a going forward basis. And what we don't have is the exact path on how to do that and how to pay for it and what it looks like. Those are the pieces that are the logical next steps to this work. And so it is important, I think, that we were able to take the time and go through the process that we went through that resulted in an extensive report. And now we have to live with what that report is telling us and determine how to move forward with it. And it's, as I said, this probably was the easy part. The study itself, implementation is always more complicated. But again, thank you to G and Melanie and to the whole team from Fitch. It was a lot of work that was done, or a lot of conversations had, a lot of backs and forths that brought us to this point, and to the staff and to the team, particularly Katie, Sean, and Andy, who brought this across the finish line. But I'm excited about the ongoing discussions. And as I said, next time we'll be talking about this is next month. Finance Committee And then we'll be determining how and what he may try to work into the 2027 budget and beyond. Because it is that season.
Do we still have access to Fitch with our contract?
Wherever,
We have other.
wherever, we never let our clients.
We don't necessarily want to keep paying it.
Yeah, no, if it's part of your current contract, we always support answer. If you want a different study done, that's a different question, but if you want just answers on that or why we got to that conclusion, we're always available. We have clients that we've had for 30, 40 years. They still call us. Hey, we're still struggling with that. Anything new out in the market, pick it out. And we still.
My thoughts are just more like along the lines of the how you land that's with the existing model or recommended model of captains. But it's not worth going in further. I'll just send it. I can send it to Sean. Yeah, curious about that.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Kind of say to the elected, fantastic group here from the city manager on down. It doesn't always roll like this. We had so many conversations. They gave us everything we needed and some, and level of professionalism, just a great group to work with, every single one of them.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much.
All right. You don't want to say to talk about garbage?
No.
I've been seeing you. I think what you're going through. No, thank you.
Sweet truck. John are gonna get to.
Thank you.
Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Yes, please.
Thanks, guys. Yeah, safe travels.
You guys leave soon. I hope it clears up.
Yeah, right.
Take care.
Sorry.
No, yeah.
Good?
Okay, it's
I was gonna say, you have a lot on your hands. Bumper. Why are we?
They won't like it.
Table two, room over here.
So that's literally my exact question. So I'm like. And I just think like this tradition. I get it. Right, so we're confident. Right. That was really. That will push. Understanding. But I think.
Okay, just in the interest of trying to get through what I think a lot more of an agenda, I'd like to keep moving if we can. To the next item. All right, we keep rolling?
Yes, please.
Okay.
Alright. Thank you for letting us tonight. We'd like to talk about the village and wastewater contract with LRS. We're seeking your direction on some emerging priorities as we look to the contract next year. So just some background and some of the context. LRS has been the village's residential wastewater since 2017, and the current contract is up at the end of this year. So we've started the process of negotiating contract renewal based on data analysis and some conversations that we've had with peer communities. At the same time, staff, both in public works and at the front desk, have absorbed an increased number of complaints. We've been working with LRS a lot to try to diagnose and resolve these. we don't want to see them in a new agreement. This is the screenshot from the 2023 community survey. Like a lot of things in Glencoe, residents have been largely satisfied with the waste collection service. Just comparing 2019 to 2023 up here, you can see that LRS earned the trust of the community. We aren't really sure what the temperature is today. We heard a few very loud voices in opposition to renewing this contract. But we don't know if those are indicative of any future survey results. Some basics of our current contract before I dive into the future. The first thing of note is the annual spring cleanup day. It's very popular with the residents, and that comes with an annual fee that we pay to LRS. The base rate structure is garbage and recycling are bundled as one. You can choose curbside or top and drive once or twice weekly. Yard waste is a seasonal annual subscription or a per use sticker purchase. And we sell those stickers to the village and to the grand. And then any bulk items, if you have furniture, appliances or anything, you have to pre-schedule pick up with LRS and prepay, and send them a bunch of information. It's priced by the size of the items. It's pretty complicated. We also have a hardship program. This is for folks who are unable to bring their lease to the curb. We offer the top and drive service at the curbside rate. We also offer seasonal suspension of service for those who may not spend their winters here. And then just as far as operations, LRS does garbage and recycling in different zones on Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday. And then they do all of the yard waste with white on Wednesday. So you understand there's just one truck in the community per day. So our recent conversations with LRS have been both fielding customer service complaints and trying to resolve those while also initiating contract negotiations. And through this process, we've come to see that service improvements are really going to be a proactive approach in preventing the need for customer service at all. I would say the biggest thing we get contacted about is missed pickups. We got a huge wave after the actual spring cleanup day that a lot of stuff wasn't picked up. We also get a lot of complaints that people can't even get through to LRS, so they have unreasonably long 45-minute hold times. So we've just realized, this is unacceptable, and the amount of staff time dedicated to this is becoming burdensome. So in our first discussions with LRS around our upcoming contracts, we asked for customer service and reporting improvements, enhanced service options, and their proposed pricing for any new contract. For their part, they have been responsive. They stated the value they place on the relationship, and they offered some concessions, including KPIs and fines related to customer service standards.
Sorry, KPI.
Key performance indicators. They were talking about, they haven't really been defined. This was in regard to long wait times. So,
A guaranteed,
I just didn't understand. I just didn't know the.
yeah, guaranteed to answer the phone within 15 minutes, stuff like that.
So again, these haven't really been defined, and we aren't sure how they would work in practice, and staff have concern that it would be administrative. So now we'd like to talk through some of the emerging priorities that are coming up in these conversations and get direction from you all. First, we'll talk about enhanced services. The bulk item discussion. LRS has mentioned that this is not their favorite thing. It's really hard for them to staff. Their guys aren't all prepared to be lifting these heavy items all day. It's workers' comp risk for them. And they have offered to allow residents one bulk item weekly under the current framework as a concession to some of the frustrations that residents are having when they call to schedule special pickups and they aren't picked up. They have also offered to allow residents 2 bulk items if the village agrees to eliminate the spring cleanup day. And we would recommend a phased approach if we wanted to do anything like this, and where residents would be allowed to put out the bulk items per week, where we would also maintain a cleanup day for a year or so to just see how that is received.
I think our question on spring cleanup day is, it's hard to gauge how beloved this event is by the community, and I think by the entire North Shore region. We are by no means the only community that LRS services with the spring cleanup day. They've expressed a strong interest in getting rid of it. Like John said, for them, operationally staffing it, it has just become a huge operational nightmare. So their offer to us is, we'll give you 2 bulk items a week. And we would like to eliminate spring cleanup day. Alternatively, they said, would you be interested in a fall cleanup day instead of spring? Because that helps with their staffing. They end up spending so much overtime on these events throughout the region that they just have a really hard time with staff during this spring cleanup frenzy that they have across the North Shore. So some of the things we like to note, like the annual Donate Recycle Day or Swain's Electronic and Document Destruction, those are spring events that allow people to get rid of some of those spring cleaning items. And then by allowing 1 item per week, is that a substitution for spring cleanup? I think it's hard, and what we're saying is we could do a phased approach if that's what we're looking at. But I think it's a hard item to measure if we could fully eliminate spring cleanup day. So that's a consideration. I think 1 bulk item is 50 pounds or less. Yeah.
Thing. So a chair,
yeah.
something that perhaps might not fit into your toter,
Yes.
something along those lines. Right. I would just make mention, spring cleanup day is one of those things that there is a certain amount of nostalgia that ties to it. Many things that are put at the curb for spring cleanup, there's no reason that those things couldn't be put in a garbage toter at any point in time. They're small enough, they don't take up that much room. That all being said, there's a contingent of the community, I think, that sees it as a recycling event. There are large scale landfill diversion components that tie into it as well. So I think we're not asking you to commit to anything on it tonight, but it's more if you have a very strong opinion one way or the other, great. If not, we're going to keep trying to noodle it with that.
I'm not sure I love the idea. First of all, I think the 1 bulk item per week is pre-existing. I think you can do that now. No?
Not officially.
Yeah.
I feel as though I called recently and they said, oh, you don't need a special pickup because ... But
That's trying to be nice.
I don't.
Or their cleaning services.
Or yeah.
But I'm not sure. I don't know that anyone would do it, but if they did, I'm not sure I love the idea of up to 2 bulk items out on our parkways every single week. 52 weeks a year. That seems, I don't know, problematic.
We would also add that their employee spend 30 now every week. Because that item I think do that, it's be too large or too heavy, or we might have issues. I just feel like it's hard to quantify. They're already complaining about. They're not picking up regular trash bags outside of bins or doing things with bungee cords. They're not doing that anyway, so I almost don't have the faith, right? But
Yeah.
maybe we can do a test one or 2 approach.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, starting with the 1 bulk item per week. I mean, I do know that the bulk item per week is included in some of our neighboring municipalities' contracts. So I think LRS has a sense of general participation per community to be able to say, we're not anticipating that every resident has a bulk item every week. Maybe we have
Right.
10% or 5% participation on a week over week average basis. So
Are the bulk items collected by a separate truck, like a flat truck?
Not necessarily.
Right, okay.
Could I add? I think it's important that we have it, so let's not do away with the collection day at all. If anything, too, spring and fall, but we are at least have at least one time a year people can put things up. There are, of course, private providers that come and pick up bulk items. You've seen the TV ads with everything disappearing. And we used them and we were stunned by the expense.
So the next enhanced service we were talking about exploring was a low volume option. We've received resident just interest in lower cost option for those who produce less waste. We, like I mentioned, we have the hardship program and we have large volume options, the twice weekly service, but we don't currently have anything that's for lower volume households in those communities.
Some senior citizen residents who live on their own, they feel like they're paying to have trash picked up every single week when they're actually only using the service every other week or about once a month based on the trash volume. So they've asked if there's lower service options. We don't have that right now. That would not necessarily be an appealing service offer to include with LRS and our contracting rule, but if it's important to us, I think it's something that we could work into our pricing structure.
Would they have a smaller cart too?
Potentially.
They already offer the
Yeah.
smallest 45s, so those are options. It's a bit of a pay-as-you-throw program. I think it would be to some degree a challenge to administer, but it would have to be something. I would see this as probably akin to our hardship program. There is some threshold that you have to meet. What you don't want to have happen is a person signs up for it and they use their neighbor's garbage can. We've had that situation. I say it's a real thing. And so that I think that's where it becomes somewhat complicated to administer. But if you're okay with the idea, we're happy to have further conversations with them.
And then waste diversion and organics, as I mentioned, we have an annual subscription or per use sticker purchase. A lot of communities bundle unlimited yard waste, food scrap, organics into their base service. We think this could increase waste diversion and help us reach a sustainability goal. As you may remember, the Sustainability Action Plan is currently under development and waste diversion is a high priority there. This would come with some complications. If we did want to bundle that in, we would, you have to then provide another bin for each household, or they would need an option to opt out of that. And if we did this, it could also replace the public works garage compost bins, which are difficult to maintain.
And the waste not. Don't we have a private service that does?
That's a great point. Yeah, we do have a private service. We have a franchise agreement, private service waste net, which is compost collection. The contract with LRS would not be impacted by this, and we could bundle organics with LRS. Those are non-competitive in their agreements, but it may have an impact on participation.
Some people use total fees. LRS. Yeah. Wait, not really why.
Well, LRS, it's seasonal. Waste not is all year, so that could be why.
Clean bin.
Yeah.
I mean, waste not provides a clean bin every single week. Versus.
This would be a change, right? This would be an opt-out, not an opt-in. It would modify a bit of how our structure exists. We don't have a large scale organics collection as it relates to yard waste because of the large number of landscaping services that operate in the community. Though, there is a growing interest certainly in the curbside composting program. I think Highland Park and Northbrook both have curbside composting programs in place today. And it's something certainly that as we look at, could be seen by some as a great thing and seen by some as the worst thing. So I think this is one of those issues that doesn't have a single right answer particularly. But
And I think with the point of the additional bin, you know, if we were going to bundle organics in the garbage and recycling, right? Everybody would get an additional bin. Some people may say, I don't have room in my garage, I don't compost it. And they could opt out, right? We do not have to give everybody an additional bin if they don't want it. But it's still going to be baked into that base cost because that's how it works structurally, community-wide, is that if we're bundling it, everybody's going to pay that base cost, whether they're using that bin or not. So that's something to consider as well.
We know what that would do to so just be additional cost for all of us. So whatever our monthly fee is would go up by $5 or.
yeah, that we don't know yet.
Yeah, we don't know what that costs.
That seems like kind of a big deal to decide on behalf of all residents that their sort of mandatory waste. That feels like a big deal.
Yeah, it
Right.
is, but it's an incentive to promote waste diversion. It's an incentive to get more people to get involved in collecting their yard waste in composting. So
This is akin to the way when we first started curbside recycling in the late 1980s. It was at first optional and then became part of the overall structure. And so I think your point is exactly right. This is why this is one of those things that doesn't have a clear and easy answer. But I think what we're trying to gauge, and again, nobody's committing to anything, this is still a long process that's ahead of us, is if there's interest in it, we will pursue it. If there isn't interest in it, or there isn't enough interest in a baked-in program, that's what we need to hear as well, because then we won't march down that path. And you may not have enough information to tell us that either, because it may depend on how much it costs, right? We recognize that as well. So we can work through both alternatives, frankly.
Bins, if you're doing that, you're composting. If you're sort of collecting food scraps, I'm just thinking about the battles that go on at our home with the raccoons and garbage, the mixed garbage, let alone if we just have one that is food scraps only.
Mhm.
And how that would work. But I'm sure you guys will address that if that's where we go.
the next slide, just this is a option for the rate based on that bundling.
Yeah, so in looking at our rate structure and other communities' rate structure, and keeping in mind that we want to encourage recycling, encourage composting, divert waste away from garbage. We just briefly, sorry, we just laid out this, what a base service could look like that is going towards these like sustainability goals. So the first thing is that the recycling bin is the largest size. I think that's what they are now. You can select either a 95 or a 65 gallon, depending on your size needs and your space. We would also want to add a 35 gallon organics bin, and then the 35, 65, or 95 gallon garbage based on your waste. And then the base rate would be priced on what size garbage you expect. We currently offer once weekly and twice weekly service, and we would want to consider adding 2 times monthly for those low volume producers. And then also adding in the one bulk item per week.
So this is a lot of the things we just talked about, how this could look in a different rate structure. So just trying to help visualize if we bundled organics and we added in the 2 times a month service and we added in the bulk weekly, this is kind of that service selection might look like if we wanted to redo the garbage.
So what's different from what we're doing today is there isn't a different garbage rate based on the size of the cart. You can have a 35, 65, or 95, it's the same price point. The organics is not rolled into it. And the 2 times a month obviously would be a new change as well.
So I just want to pause here because
this contract only comes up every 4 years or however often. And our sustainability action plan is getting finalized in the next few months. And this is a rare opportunity to align our actions with the goals that will be coming out of that plan. So I just wanted to keep that on your minds. So the overarching question remains is whether we want to renew this contract if we get favorable terms or ultimately go out for a competitive bid. LRS has cited various inflationary reasons for why we would expect rate increases. We review the market and we understand we may only get a limited number of bids if we did go to an RFP. It can also come in higher than any renewal terms that we receive. Either way, we think a 6-month extension is feasible and would allow us more time to develop the RFP. And then any potential change would occur in the summer rather than in December. So our next steps are to dive into the new rates that LRS will propose and do a price analysis on that. We'd like to bring a recommendation back based on your direction, whether we want to renew, approve an extension, or start developing our.
So a couple of points, just to underscore Jen's and Monica's comments. We've been talking with SWANK, the Solid Waste Agency of Northern Cook County. They are our waste partners, if you will. And we kind of started our process by having that conversation. The world is a bit different today than it was in 2017, which was the last time we actually did an RFP for this. And in 2017, that was when, if you may recall, we transitioned from an in-house service to an outsourced model. A couple of points, and this is going to come into play as we continue the analysis of what LRS brings to us. A transition to a new provider is not a simple task in an environment like we are. Glencoe has a lot of unique driveways, a lot of unique pickup situations, narrow streets. There was a lengthy onboarding process, if you will, back in 2017, and that onboarding process was done with our in-house staff who were still in place because we transitioned them to other roles in the Public Works Department alongside LRS to ease that transition. It would be difficult, more difficult, I think, this time to do a transition from one provider to another. Not impossible, but more difficult. So to the point of if there were an extension that we would seek from LRS if we were going to go to RFP, one of the reasons that we would seek that is that January is a terrible time to do a transition from one provider to another. You're going to want to have warm weather, people home, those kinds of things. That is more true in June than it is in January. So that's a piece of it. We're going to continue looking at what they have provided to us. There are fewer providers that are out there. There used to be more. They've consolidated like nearly everything, it feels like. And so having a limited pool means, as Jen said very clearly, we may get worse results in an RFP process. I've been a part of a process like that, and it's not great because you could have negotiated something and then you find yourself in a circumstance where you're actually paying more because you did a competitive process. So we're going to try to be very mindful of those things. Your feedback tonight is helpful because it gives us some parameters within which to look at this. My hope is that we can come back no later than September and give you a sense of where things stand. LRS is eager to stay in service to the community. They have expressed that. We have expressed that you should show it by underscoring your customer service standards, by giving us numbers that are practical and real. And we, of course, I think, want to be mindful of the sustainability components of garbage collection. Glencoe, I haven't looked at the numbers in a while. But for a long time, we were the per capita, the highest recycling rate in all of the 23 SWANK communities. That's not nothing. I think we've always kind of had a high uptake rate. We haven't seen the same thing with composting. I think the waste not contracts are relatively inexpensive, but we just haven't seen quite the same level of uptake. So that may be symbolic of whether the community would actually engage in curbside composting. I think we'll do a little bit more research with our neighbors, kind of understand, to your point, Trustee Rubin, what's the maintenance problems, what are the downsides of a program like that. As we continue to evaluate it, we'll bring you back more information. Okay.
Any other closing thoughts? Any decision about whether we're going to sit in the park or we're just going to talk about it again?
We'll bring it back to you.
And one last question then. So if we ask for the extension, might the price go up in a 6 months?
I think we would look to do the 6-month extension on current CPI rates within our current contract, but.
Okay, we did that. I will say we did that the last time. We aligned the contracts when we were renegotiating with them to push the contract out. I'm not too worried about that. They've already expressed some willingness to extend if that was the village's decision. But that's something that I think we would have to work with them closely on.
One of the conversations at some point we had about RFP, no RFP, is that the bin replacement piece is really complicated, but aren't we essentially looking at a bin replacement piece with any number of these options within LRS as well?
If people change their service level, potentially, yes.
And do we anticipate the same level of complexity, or is it better because they're still the devil we know and they know our?
I think it would be somewhat easier than if we went to a group or a waste management and they had to come pick up everybody's bin, drop off the new ones. This would be more surgical. And if we did the curbside composting, that would be something that basically you drop one at every location. But I think it would be easier than a wholesale change out.
Do we know that the other companies do composting too?
They do.
Most do, yeah. We haven't done a full assessment, but I think it's a fairly common
That's
service.
sort of, because it's a sustainability thing, it's an important thing that we offer composting that we play as part of our overall good Glencoe citizenship stuff. We need to sort of do that. I'm not sure how I use waste now. It's kind of nice. You get a new, you do it too.
I really like.
You get like a new bin or a new little bucket every week,
time.
so 2 weeks, whatever it is. So it doesn't have that. Be concerned to the order of how these things work. If it's, it's a 5 years.
Because even the new bins actually smell a little bit. I have sensitive nose, but I mean, they're still being reused even though they're being sanitized or whatever.
Plastic absorbs.
So I can only imagine what it looks like if it's not getting this
Plastic
weekly
absorbs.
refresh.
Yeah. All right. Let me ask this. If there's nothing else on this, I don't want to give short shrift with the next item that was on our schedule for today. Is it possible to, let's tell me otherwise, but otherwise I'm assuming it would be better if we move this to a later.
I think we could probably, this is really informational. It's not, it's kind of a status report on what we've been working on. We're not really asking you to do anything other than to see some of the information. I will tell you, I just got a text message from the village president that he should be here by 7:10. So that probably gives us a minute. Okay, fun to roll a little bit if you don't mind.
That's fast and. You can hold the meeting.
All right, so we're
All
ready.
right, we're ready.
Okay, so we're gonna go over, this is draft, there's draft all over this. The draft, report from our, 2026 water supply analysis, which if you remember, it started in 2025, but we're looking at a western water supply connection among other things. So I wanted to go back, it's been a while since we talked about water. I'm gonna cruise through the background water slide. So just looking at water in the region, wanted to remind everybody, our North Shore communities here, we have quite a few straws in the water, right? And then we get to the Chicago area and they have the 2 main water production plants that service quite a bit of the region.
here are our agencies regulating how we produce water and making sure that we're doing things correctly and following the rules. And then this is an overview of our water system. So just a reminder, our water treatment plant is down at the lake near the beach. And right adjacent to that, we have 2 million gallons of reservoir, and we also have a 500,000 gallon water tower out by Skokie Boulevard. We have over 58 miles of water main, ranging anywhere from 4 to 16 inches, servicing over 3,000 homes, 3,000 meters, and over 500 fire hydrants. So it's a robust water distribution and water production system. This is a new map. This is something that Public Works has been working on and putting together, but this shows just age classifications of our water main. So if you remember in 2016, we did the water distribution study, and everything in blue is those annual water main replacements that we've been doing since 2016. In yellow, it shows all of the water main work that was done prior to 1950s, and then in the red, or prior, yeah, from 1950 earlier, or till now, and then red is prior to 1950, sorry. So you can see we have been doing a ton of work, and it's not to say that we're not doing anything, we are, but there's a lot of work to remain in investing in our water distribution system. So I thought this was a great visual. We've updated these numbers since the last time we talked as well. So these are our 2025 numbers, but just a reminder, our water treatment plant has an 8 million gallon per day capacity. On average, we produce about 1.4 MGD per day. And we have a max of typically about 3.5 per day. Too fast. Just wanted to talk through too some of the things that create demand on our water production. We want to make sure we're meeting the pressure requirements in our system for fire flow. Irrigation is usually what causes the highest demand on our system, which creates that peak flow and that maximum 6.5 MGD instantaneous rate that we see going through our system. What we are seeing in the trend overall is that redevelopment is causing a lower demand on our water needs. More water efficient fixtures, more efficient plumbing. We are actually seeing the amount of water that we need to produce year over year going down. And then this is our existing infrastructure from our straw in Lake Michigan, going up through our water treatment plant, which is our water is treated through the conventional treatment method. And then it is pumped out into our storage, our 2 MGD storage at Lakefront Park, as well as our 500,000 gallon storage elevated tank, and throughout our distribution system, and including all of our emergency interconnects with our neighbors. So that's our review. I hope it didn't go too fast, but I wanted to just recap kind of water in the community. So diving into the results of the report. I just want to remind everybody this report, like many other of the hydraulic models that we've done for our water distribution system, they are looking at modeling at an instantaneous point in time. They call it the steady state stimulation. So it provides us with a high level look of what our water distribution system needs. If we were actually going to make a change, we would dive into deeper modeling, which would require a lot more time and analysis, and that's called an extended period simulation. And that would give us much more of the insights that we need to know as we scope out and design the work. But this is high level. So what this report looked at was 3 modeling scenarios. The first 2 scenarios looked at a transmission main connecting into our distribution system. The first one was a western connection. So we're looking at a transmission main that is going to connect at our most western point along Dundee Road into our distribution system. The second would be a transmission main running all the way through our community into our 2 million gallon reservoir at Lakefront Park. So we would be able to maintain a filling of that reservoir and maintain our high lift pumps at our water plant to provide pressure and distribution throughout our system. The third scenario we looked at was a little bit different in the effort to make sure that we were building and evaluating a resilient and redundant system. We looked at redundancy overall. So we looked at creating another connection from the west down maybe the Comet Easement or Skokie Boulevard down to our water tower. So if the main providing a feed into our system along Dundee had a damage or break, could we be fed with a redundant feed on a different alignment? And we'll get into those results. Those are the three scenarios we looked at. The report also evaluated our 10-year CIP, our investments into our water plant, and we also had them take a look at our emergency interconnects with Highland Park, Winnetka, and Northbrook. So diving into the results, like I said, that first scenario was a western connection to the western part of the distribution system. The actual point of connection we're talking about is Dundee and Holfelder or Forest Way, that intersection there. What they are proposing is we would need a 20-inch transmission main that would reduce down to a 16-inch prior to connecting into our distribution system. In order to get water from the west to the village, we would need 2 million gallons of storage at the point of sale, as well as a pumping station. With this scenario, we were also provided change in pressure maps. So obviously, changing where the feed of the water would come in changes what the PSI or the pressure in the system is throughout. I think previously we kind of talked about relocating the heart of the system, right? Right now we're pumping from the lakefront, and we would be pumping from the west. What the results showed in the pressure change maps were really very little PSI change. I would say less than 5, probably 1, 2, or 3 in most areas. Our consultant said that that's really not much, that you're looking good. I want to bring us back to the map that we were just looking at, though. Our system is a little fragile. And so, they did suggest some preparatory kind of exercises of flushing and doing reverse flow exercises to help kind of strength test our system and see how it would do in preparation for a water supply transition. So there are steps that they would recommend to help participate and prepare for that change in pressure. So good news is that the change in pressure is tolerable. I think the reality is there's still a need to be somewhat concerned. Scenario 2, we looked at a direct connection to the 2 million gallon reservoir at Lakefront Park. For this, they're suggesting a 16-inch transmission main all the way from point of sale to the connection. And for this, there's no change in pressure maps, right? So this is one of the appeals of looking at this scenario. I do want to talk on pricing. The dollars shown here are dollars today. So what we haven't really dove into, and we will as we go to finalize the report, is dollars today aren't relevant because it doesn't matter until the point at which we would go to construct. So we need to look at adding an escalation. I think at this point we're looking at potentially asking them to do a phased price approach to say, this is what the price would be in 10 years. This is what the price would be in 15 or 20. So we could kind of understand what those projected costs are out into the future. But you can see scenario 1 at 28 million does have a lower cost connecting into the western edge versus scenario 2 closer to 34 million with that no change in system pressure connecting into the.
Does the 28 million include any supposed improvements for the pressure changes, or is it just without any
No
improvements that might be? Right, because you don't know.
No, yeah, it did note some of those activities that we could do to prepare for and help, ready our system, but those costs are maybe more operational. They weren't necessarily part of the capital construction costs that they were analyzing. The third scenario, like I talked about, was that redundant water supply connection. So again, if we have one main going across Dundee to connect into our system, we looked at having a main heading south to our water tower as well. So we would have two separate alignments connecting into our water system. What we determined is that that singular connection down to our water tower would not be sufficient to sustain us if anything happened along our main along Dundee. So that was not a viable route for redundancy. And what we ended up looking at in the report was dual mains along Dundee Road, which would add another $8 million to the project costs just to have two mains running along Dundee. I'm gonna move in.
Excuse
Yeah.
me, for that, in the context of that's a third independent of the other, in other words, explain, would we do that now with our current system? And
It's a great question. I think we're gonna get to it. But basically, at the time that we would be evaluating these scenarios and deciding how we want to move forward, we would have to make the decision to say, is $8 million worth it to us to say, if something happens to one of our mains, we have a redundant line. A lot of communities are looking into this right now. It is a very popular assessment where communities are saying, oh my gosh, if something happens to our one line, we are without water. And that's a scary place to be in. When we start talking about emergency interconnects, the decisions that we make for those emergency interconnects may greatly impact the decision on that $8 million and whether or not it would be worth it to do.
This doesn't address the source and supply of the water.
Correct. This
Okay,
is
this
a
is a-
Western,
It's agnostic to the supply.
yes, yep,
It's
exactly.
just how would we receive it from
Yeah.
us?
Correct. All right, so looking at our current 10-year CIP, they did evaluation of all the projects that are currently listed for investment into the water plant. The price that they came out with was $8.3 million. If you look at our CIP right now, we have about $5.5 million planned in our 10-year CIP. So we're seeing a $3 million difference in what we thought those projects were costs and what they said those projects would cost, which is a great gut check, right? Some of it, there's a difference in interpretation of the scope, which I think is helpful. And an easy example is the electrical upgrade. So we had looked at if we need to replace our generator, how much would that cost? I think we have about $750,000 in our current CIP. They were suggesting that's going to cost about $3 million. I mean, some of that is access to the site, the cost of generators these days, but they also suggested quite a few additional electrical upgrades associated with that generator swap out that resulted in that significant price increase. So I want to be clear, this does not mean we're going to go and add $3 million to our 10-year CIP, but it gives us a tool to go back through and better update our CIP and maybe, reschedule some of those projects out and with more updated pricing. This does not include any of the ongoing or recently completed projects. So our site security or window replacement, and then even last year we finished the redundant influent line at the water plant. They also gave us a couple additional projects to consider. They identify the rehabilitation of filters 1 through 4. We're seeing that as a project that's beyond our 10-year timeline, which I think they would agree, but that is a significant cost that we may want to consider, just as we would as a price consideration for replacement of our raw water intake. And additionally, they suggested looking at a compute system analysis. That is something we do on an ongoing basis, but I think it's something for us to continue to routinely invest in and make sure it's a priority year over year. So the big number that we have, the asterisk on it, is when we talked about pricing out a new intake pipe, our consultant was very hesitant to give us a number. And I kept pushing for one. I want to know, I think currently we have 7 million was our ballpark, and we wanted to know, is that realistic? So the number that is provided here is based off of Evanston's recently constructed new intake. And that, I have to say, is the primo intakes. It is a 60-inch diameter intake. They pushed a lot of the risk on the contractor at the time of construction because that's what worked for them. So I have an asterisk here because, you know, if we were to take the last estimate that we had, for our intake and add inflation, I'd say that put us maybe closer to 15 to 20. Either way, it's a big project. So we have our intake inspected every other year. And I think if you can remember back in 2017, we found that our intake had higher level of sedimentation, and we did the reverse flow to clean it out. So, you know, at this time, we're not noticing any need or deficiency to replace it, but it's something that we do inspect every other year and make sure that we are keeping it. Because obviously, this is not something that you want to have an emergency or occur on or have to be working on plans. So any identified deficiency, we make sure that we would be, you know, picking up and addressing as quickly as possible. Moving on, the last thing we looked at was our emergency interconnects. So for this, I think what we asked our consultant to do is basically say, if we had an emergency, could we get water from our neighbors right now? Not with a future update or any improvements. We really wanted to look at current day scenario. So they gave us some isolation maps, identified critical valves that we would need to operate to isolate certain sections of Glencoe and then open up and be able to receive water. So this analysis was done based on our average day demand. They felt confident that we could split our community in half and be able to receive water from both our neighbors to the north and to the south in an emergency situation. This would obviously take some field testing and verification. These are not our emergency interconnects. I think the last one we operated was Northbrook, but they're not something that we operate every day. And I think that is a point to which we want to update and focus our attention on. So
just one thing to note, this is something that all of our neighbors are likewise in the same position and are also exploring. I've been meeting with my counterparts from 9 of our neighboring communities. One of the primary talking points has been our emergency interconnects and all of us collectively working to invest in them together so that as we're improving them, we're improving the lot of all of us. But it's important to note that emergency interconnects are just that. They are emergency, they are short term. They are not
days or weeks or hours.
days, probably at most. But you know, if there was a catastrophic failure, these interconnects are not going to be the solution to those problems. So, you know, to some point, that underscores what Monica was talking about early on in that scenario 3, where, you know, is there a replacement redundant effort that we also look at? So because recognizing the importance and necessity of water being reliable in all of our systems, all of us around us, finding that we're going to have to do some serious investment. We're talking about that collectively, not just community by community.
yeah, and to that point, I wanted to remind everybody, we do have money in this calendar year's budget to start that process with Winnetka. So what we started the conversation last year with Winnetka. We both have an interest in creating a bi-directional interconnect. So there are interconnects that are one directional flow. We have an interconnect with Northfield right now where we can provide them with water on a one-way. They can't provide us with water, but we can provide them. So there's one-way interconnects. And what we're looking to do is the bi-directional would include a pumping station. So we're in the process right now of beginning that with Winnetka to upgrade that. It would come with an intergovernmental agreement for design, construction, and operations of that interconnect. So that's something that we're actively working towards as well. So I think what the report looked at, though, was doing a more simple update of swapping out the current valves at our interconnects with pressure reducing valves, which would ensure better operationality of those when turning them on a more controlled way.
That would be a more short-term solution, but again, more so in a one-way directional feed. So those could be a very more short-term. I guess,
Or it might
Step.
make more sense to
Yeah.
just, we're doing stuff, to do stuff with our neighbors
Correct.
together, share the costs.
correct. So there's,
Connection.
so that 1.8 is just for updating the valves. Higher costs would be associated with the type of connection that we're looking at with the Glencoe with the booster station.
So
So,
one point doesn't have the pumping station.
correct.
Right, but.
Yeah.
But it also still doesn't save you in the event of a catastrophic event. That's where option 3 is relevant.
Mhm.
And then does option 3
If
help
that's
our?
the if that's the contention.
Right, fair.
There are other things.
Very fair, but would that then help the neighbors as well?
I mean, I think the more reliable our system is, the better, and just in general. I mean, so you're saying, is creating a dual supply, wherever our supply is coming from, does that help our neighbors? I mean, I think there's so many scenarios you could look at with why our water service may be impacted. It could be something small where it's a significant main break in a specific vicinity and we want to start pumping water because of its location to that border. It could be something more significant. I think a lot of those questions really depend on what's happening. But I think to answer your question, what we're looking at is how resilient can we make our system in the most cost-effective way? Because I think, we can make it, like Nikki said, we can build a bridge to the moon, But is that what,
Is it
I think
practical?
we gotta find that balance for cost,
Yeah.
and what meets the needs of our community.
Even very catastrophic main failures recently, if you remember, last January in Skokie, they had their primary transmission main blow. It flooded neighborhoods, it, encased cars in ice. They had that back operational in 2 days. So it is possible to make it such that you really just need a few days. And so that's, to Monica's point, it's all a matter of degree as to how far you go with these investments. And that's kind of the next round of things that we'll talk through.
So just to wrap this up, because now it's time.
Yeah.
Some of the key takeaways, this report gives us the tools that we need. We now understand the infrastructure that's going to be required for our Western water supply, the land use and the cost associated with multiple different scenarios. It's also, we're really pleased with how we can take this information and work it into our CIP as we currently stand. Obviously, it just reiterates and reemphasizes the importance of our emergency and helps with that guide. Thank you.
All right, what's that? Yeah, let's get set. We have a motion to adjourn. Let's do adjourn. Second. All in favor? Aye.
Right.
All right, we're adjourned.